Hello, Paul Hamilton here for iPad Monthly. We're going to have a look at some accessibility functions on the iPad now, just to help all of our learners. These are just little kind of hot tips, I guess, that I've noticed over the years with my kids, and some of the things that we've implemented and shown the kids have really helped in regard to learning, specifically with research and projects. So let's take a little bit of a look. So let's say our students are researching France, for example, a country or a city or a continent. And some of these kids are really struggling with the amount of text and actually with the whole research process. So let's take a closer look, I guess, at some of these settings that we can have a look at. So I'm going to jump here into General on the settings on my iPad, and I'm going to take a look at some of the things that are in here. So I'm going to go to Accessibility, and I'm going to have a look at some of these things. So at the moment, if I jump into Safari, and if I, for example, want my students to research that, and I highlight a paragraph or a sentence or whatever it might be, when I take my finger away from that, all it does is have copy and define. Now, the define in itself is a really, really great tool to use. But if I wanted to do a little bit more, I'm going to jump back into accessibility here. I apologize for jumping backwards and forwards. And I'm just going to turn on the speech section and have a look at some of the things in here. So what I can actually do here is I can turn on my speech selection. I can do the different rates, so going up and down. And I can select the different voices. So I might actually find that different languages or English, different aspects of English. So I've got, if I go back to English there, I've got some different things there. And I can actually play around with the different quality of that as well. But if I just go back to speech there, and if I turn on my speech selection, I can also highlight the content that is spoken down the bottom, or I can do speak auto text as well. But if I just do that one for now, I'll show you how that's a little bit different than what we had before. So if I go now and highlight a sentence, you'll see here that now I've got the speak selection, so it's able to read it back for the student. It's such a simple concept that I don't think kids use enough in regard to listening to the content that is actually on websites. So what else can we do? Let's jump back in here. As I mentioned before, I've now got my speech on, and some of the things that I might actually do is put on the highlight content. So now when it actually does the speaking, and it's actually reading back the words. So if I go into that part that I just did here, if I just do this one here, and if I press speak, okay, you can see there that it's actually saying it back to us, which is fantastic. And what we can actually do there is switch on the accessibility. We can highlight context. We can go back here and say, okay, we want, with that speech, we want it to actually auto speak. So that actually might be the actual speaking automatically when I highlight something, or it might not be. So that's a really, really nice feature there in regard to getting that speaking on, and something that you really need to play around with in regard to the actual speech aspect of it. There are some other things that we can do, just even in regard to the sounds. I had a student that was actually typing and was really missing letters and missing words. So we can do things like actually turn on the keyboard clicks, where it's actually giving them an indication of when I've actually hit a letter when I'm actually typing it, which is fantastic. By the way, that speech is really, really beneficial too when kids are actually typing up stories, to have it read it back to them as well, which is pretty cool. If I go back to General, have a little bit more of a look. If we go down here, we've got locks. We've actually got some keyboard aspects here. Now, this is something that can frustrate teachers and students alike, and that's in regard to some of the things that happen. So some students I know don't actually like the predictive text, so when they're actually typing, they'll actually split that off. Some people are concerned about the split keyboard and actually kids using their thumbs and really not typing fast enough, so that can be used. Auto correction, turning that off when you do certain aspects of literacy. By turning off the auto correction, you actually have students that are more in their natural form and actually have to edit and re-look at their work a little bit more carefully. So all of these things, sometimes the predictive text is also not so great with the younger students, especially when they're typing their names and it doesn't come up and it keeps changing it. So these are kind of the little things that we can actually look through in regard to some shortcuts even. We can actually have a look at shortcuts that we can implement for our students that are getting things wrong on a consistent basis. We can enable dictation, or we can turn the dictation off. So there are some little things there in the accessibility that are really worth playing with. So that was down in the keyboard aspect of it. The accessibility, as I said before, we've got some things that can really help. For example, students with hearing impairments as well. We've got some things like subtitles. We can actually turn those on and actually have a look in how they look in regard to it. You can actually increase the text when it comes to different things in videos. All really worth having a look at, and not just for students that have specific, I guess, impairments in regard to learning difficulties, but also just students who are really struggling with things like research, and being able to, for example, enlarge the text. And actually enlarging that text of my screen on my iPad, for example, is really beneficial for lots of learners, for bold, but also that speaking. Really worthwhile for kids that are struggling with research skills, that are struggling with literacy, but are quite capable of listening to the content and actually being able to then summarize it and put it in a project. So that's Paul Hamilton here for iPad Monthly. A really closer look at the accessibility options for iPad, and I think it's something that Apple does incredibly well in regard to guided access, switching controls, assistive touch. All these things are really, really beneficial for our kids in regard to moving forward. There was another thing that I just wanted to show you there. We've got things like Zoom. You can actually turn your Zoom on, and you can see there, now that I have my Zoom on, when I actually go to my websites, for example, I can actually take a closer look at some of the text that's actually in there. You know, the iPad is full of these fantastic accessibility, I guess, features that we need to take a closer look at and really help our students with using technology to actually help them learn. So that's Paul Hamilton here for iPad Monthly. Hope you found that beneficial. Looking at the accessibility options in the iPad, certainly something that's worth a look if you haven't already. Paul Hamilton here, signing off.